So we're now going to hear from Luba Fein, who is a feminist activist and sex trade survivor and abolitionist. She's a volunteer at the feminist organisation Philia and is going to talk about a woman's rights to her body. Is it relevant to the sex industry discussion? So welcome, Luba, and over to you.
At the end of my previous speech about the Nordic model, about 3 months ago, a woman from the US asked me a question. She wanted to know how to deal with the following argument. Why does a woman have the right to her body to have an abortion, but not to be in prostitution or surrogacy? This was the question and the argument. So why do we respect the woman's choice in one situation and in the other, we do not? I have encountered this argument several times. So why indeed? What is the difference? And the answer is that there are three big problems with the whole discourse and with the choice arguments, both in general and in particular when applied to the sex industry. So let's start. My first problem with the concept of free choice is that the entire discourse suits the academy better than reality. Because what is a choice anyway? Are we choosing something when the alternative is physical harm to us or our families? This is a prevalent situation in prostitution. Or are we choosing something when we have no idea about the consequences? This is an even more common situation in prostitution. It is impossible to understand how prostitution affects a woman before she is actually there. And when you are at the lowest point of your life, physically, mentally, and socially, and you cannot make an active change that requires enormous resources, do you choose not to change? Because this is the situation of almost every woman in prostitution. So choice is a very vague concept. We do not have clear definitions for it, and people use it way too often to abandon the needy and sleep peacefully. My second problem with the choice argument is that our right to choose is never a sufficient condition to justify a social practice. The choice is merely a minimum standard. A legitimate social practice must meet several other criteria. We do not allow debt bondage by choice. We do not allow payment of wages below the minimum. And we do not allow domestic violence because the woman chose a violent husband. And here is my third and the biggest problem with the choice argument. Even if 100% of the women did not enter prostitution under coercion and threats, this is not the case, but let's assume so for the sake of discussion. We must still use additional criteria to test the legitimacy of the practice. And when we talk about social practices as feminists, we must do a macro analysis. The whole discourse about individual choice is suitable for the psychologist's coach. But feminism is a sociological body of knowledge, not psychological. And feminist analysis is always macro. So when we do a macro analysis of abortions, prostitution, and surrogacy, we clearly see that these are very different practices in essence. Abortions are a medical service that women need. The need for abortions comes from the women. Although even in the field of medicine, we have profit industries such as the cosmetic surgery industry or some other industries, abortions are nothing like that. I have never seen anywhere in the world a commercial advertisement that convinces women to have an abortion with the benefits of an abortion and the excellent abortion experience precisely at this clinic. We don't have ads like this. Abortion is a women's need that women have had to fight for throughout in the history. They usually receive a partial solution to it, and not everywhere. So when abortions are prohibited by law, they do not disappear. The women continue to undergo them and risk their life for them. But prostitution is not a medical service. It's not a medical need. It is an industry. Of course, it's not a legitimate industry because it sells sexual exploitation. But even if you don't fully understand it, you cannot claim that it exists because women want it. Even if we pretend that prostitution is just work, the suggestion that the choices of prostituted individuals drive the industry is nonsensical. Businesses are driven by customer demand, whether authentic or artificial. No industry exists simply because the workers want it. Even legitimate industries like hotels or textiles, they don't exist because workers want it. It is the demand that creates jobs for them. The same goes for prostitution. And of course, I'm not trying to say that prostitution, women in prostitution enjoy conditions that remind those of legitimate industries. I'm only explaining why industries in general exist. The sex trade is not the women's choice, but the pimps and Johns' choice. Prostitution exists whether women choose it or not. The pimps will sell as many women as they can. Women's choices are not a factor. For the same reason exactly, there is no point in trying to eradicate prostitution by improving the social conditions in the country. I don't know if you came across a slogan that pimp lovers like very much. Don't fight prostitution, fight poverty. So don't fight them, fight poverty. But they try to imply that prostitution is simply the poor woman's way of getting rich. But what do you think would happen if all the women were rich in a particular country? Does anyone really believe that pimps and Johns will simply say, well, friends, the women don't want to be prostitutes. Let's close the business and go home. They won't say so. Their ways of getting women for their business have nothing to do with women's desires. They threaten women, they lie to women, they manipulate, they traffic vulnerable women and girls from abroad, they extort women, they exploit girls who lack family support. The methods are not lacking, and the new methods are created every moment. None of them is related to what the women really want. The same goes for surrogacy. It is an industry. And the primary beneficiaries are surrogacy agencies and private clinics. The source of demand for that industry is people who do not want or cannot give birth to a child naturally. And the surrogates, they are not the ones who choose the industry to exist. About 2 years ago, I interviewed for a podcast my dear friend from Ukraine. Her name is Maria Dmitrieva. Many of you know her. She told me that in the war-torn areas of eastern Ukraine, with collapsing infrastructure, you can often see in public transport surrogacy agencies' ads. The ads invite women to become surrogates. In countries with a legal sex industry, we can see big ads for brothels. Check who paid for these ads, and you will find out who exactly moves the wheels of those industries, who choose prostitution to exist, and who choose surrogacy to exist. And these are not the women. Thank you. One interesting question was what was about ethical porn. And another comment in the chat that I have seen was that in the West, all prostitutes are choosing it unless they are trafficked. So they are choosing it unless they are not choosing it, and that's why I'm against the Nordic model. So I think we can like unite to those two comments and ask again, what does it mean? How do we know what is ethical porno, ethical prostitution, and what does it mean women are trafficked or not trafficked? So if we are speaking about trafficking, if we use the definitions of Palermo Protocol, which I personally agree, so trafficking, it includes all sorts of prostitution where individuals were prostituted by many methods, as I said, and one of them was exploiting vulnerabilities. So I have been in the sex trade, and after more than 30 years, I'm fighting against the sex trade after exiting it. I have never, ever seen a single woman who was in prostitution and who wasn't vulnerable in some way. Women in prostitution are always they're always there because of sort of vulnerability, whether they were either born with that vulnerability or vulnerability was created in prostitution. Everyone is vulnerable. And now we are talking about ethical porn and how we can separate between by choice and trafficking. So recently we have a organization, Prostitution Research and Education, founded by Melissa Farley. She is here in this chat. So this group published a very important research among women in pornography in Sweden. I was among her research assistants, and I'm very proud of it. I put in the chat link to the research. Please, I beg you, please read this report if you ever asked yourself about ethical porn. So what is the criteria for porn to be ethical? Like intuitively, I would say porn that didn't harm the people in it. If porn that harmed the women exploited or photographed in it cannot be ethical. So how do we know whether women are harmed or not harmed? Intuitively, do you know any woman who would be not harmed, injured, damaged by being presented in the way like in modern porn, like we can say it? I know no woman in that. But in our research, we actually researched a sample of women, and we asked them what they experienced in porn and what were the consequences of porn on them. And we found out that the vast majority of women were harmed in a very severe way. Please read about it. And moreover, most women interviewed by us, they didn't agree to be photographed for porn. And most women don't even know when they were photographed or videotaped or where they weren't. So even the most pathetic basic criteria for consent doesn't exist in modern porn. In Sweden, a Western country, where as someone among the participants said, women are by choice unless they're trafficked. So you decide, please, whether women who do not know whether they were photographed or women who were not asked, not paid. Many women are photographed by pimps and johns without giving any consent. Ethical porn cannot exist, and even if it existed, like some magical creature, when people watch the video, they cannot know anything about that woman. Is this woman suffering? Was it damaged? Maybe she committed suicide due to porn consequences. We cannot know it. So ethical porn cannot exist as general idea. And the same about women being in prostitution by choice. How do you know? How do you know which woman in prostitution is by choice? There, or any research that we examine now shows that women are desperately willing to exit prostitution, but they have no resources, emotional, physical, economic, social support. They have no resources to do it.